Hey, what's going on, you guys? My name is the Raptor, and welcome back to Who'd Win and Why. And this time we've got the Slender Man, created by Eric Knudsen, going up against It, aka Pennywise, created by Stephen King. These two incredible horror icons are notorious for targeting children, and are among the most powerful supernatural beings in fiction. But after this fight, only one can continue their killing spree. And today it's time for me to decide who I think would win in a one-on-one battle of mythical madness. So, who'd win and why? Let's find out! Alright, so first we're going to talk about Slender Man. Created in 2009 by Eric Knudsen on a forum on a website known as Something Awful, the Slender Man is a supernatural creature with a mostly unknown origin and extremely ambiguous abilities. His look has varied from time to time over the years, but he's usually depicted as a slim 6 or 7 foot tall humanoid wearing a black suit and tie, possessing no hair and no facial features whatsoever. Slender Man is known for stalking his victims for extremely long periods of time before finally making the killing move in order to maximize the amount of mental strain and torture that he can give them. And he targets children for the vast majority of the time, despite his clear power over all of humanity. No one fully knows why he does what he does or why he does it in the way that he does, and no one seems to be able to comprehend and properly describe him, assuming they could even get a glimpse of him without dying. But those lucky ones who did all have their own theories about this unnatural being. As he displays no emotions and lives only to hunt and exploit fear, Slender Man is considered by many to be the physical manifestation of fear in some way, others believing that he may be an omnipresent force. Some go so far as to say that he may even exist on a fourth-dimensional plane, which gives him his terrifying power. But whatever theory or theories you buy into, no one truly understands who or what he is, which is exactly what makes him one of the greatest dangers to all of us. One of Slender Man's most noticeable physical attributes is his famous ability to sprout tentacle-like appendages, or tendrils, from his back to use as extra limbs for reaching, grabbing, or even wall crawling. While he may only produce around 6 at a time generally, there is no known limit on how many he can create at once, and has been shown making dozens of tendrils if he desires, which also doesn't appear to limit or weaken him in any way. He can extend his tendrils to virtually any length, and he can do the same regarding his overall height and shape, which explains how he's been seen as tall as 15 feet in some reports. Slender Man is also the master of all things stealth, as he not only has his methods for camouflaging, but also possesses what is called selective invisibility, as in he can choose who can see him and who cannot at any given time, though there are a couple of workarounds to this, including how he can always be visually picked up by cameras, and how his mere presence can visibly affect all surrounding electronic devices. On top of that, Slender Man has a high degree of control over the interconnected continuum of space-time, which he shows off most prominently in the form of instantaneous teleportation. He can appear and disappear anywhere he wants to in the blink of an eye. No matter how far you run, he will catch up to you, especially considering that he can always detect where his victims are without fail. He's also shown displays of enhanced strength and speed, and he's got an instant regenerative healing factor that can repair any and all types of physical injuries. But those are far from the most horrifying traits of this creepypasta character. The mind of the Slender Man is undoubtedly his greatest weapon, and we've seen it used in a plethora of deadly and straight-up disturbing ways over the years. He can possess complete control over his victims' minds whenever he wants to, forcing them to act upon his will. By doing this, he can either turn people into his proxies, essentially his own slaves whom he can use to interact with current victims on his behalf, among other tasks, or he can just cut right to the chase and force his victims to immediately kill themselves or kill others, dominating their emotions, thoughts, and actions. As mentioned before, however, Slender Man often waits a while before finishing off his prey, solely in order to continuously torture them and break them down to the point of giving up on hope and their happiness. With just his presence in your near vicinity, he can induce paranoia, exhaustion, depression, disorientation, nausea, vomiting, blackouts, nightmares, hallucinations, massive memory alteration, mood swings, fevers, bleeding from your eyes, nose, and mouth, and even more. And again, this is when he isn't controlling your actions or emotions directly. The longer he stalks, the longer the torture goes and the more intense it becomes, and it can reach the point where your physical health, mental health, and whole life are in shambles, and you don't have it in you anymore to keep pushing through. His telepathy can also produce similar negative effects along with mental communication, and he's got levitation, telekinesis, pyrokinesis, and weather manipulation, in case everything else wasn't enough. Slender Man's abilities are powerful. Some people may even be tempted to call him godly. But while mental manipulation is his strong suit, that may also be the best tool one could use against him. He's tough physically, sure, but anyone that can affect his mind in a major way could do some damage to him, especially if they have any mental resistances to defend against his abilities. Despite his imperfections, the Slender Man is the horror legend that absolutely no one wants to get the attention of. Man, woman, child, anything else really, it doesn't matter. If he's stalking you, don't bother running or saying your prayers. You're already dead. Alright, so now it's time to move over to Pennywise. Created in 1986 by Stephen King in the horror novel known as It, Pennywise, also known as It, is an alien billions of years old that originated from an alternate dimension known as the Macroverse. Pennywise is a being of immense power whose true form exists in a realm beyond the physical world and is impossible for any human mind to fully comprehend. Also originating from the Macroverse and known as Pennywise's eternal enemy was a giant floating turtle named Maturin, who was known as the representation of good, completely mirroring Pennywise, who is believed to be the representation of all evil. Unfortunately, Maturin died after supposedly choking to death on a couple of galaxies, and after that there was barely anyone who could prove Pennywise's equal. Millions of years prior, Pennywise arrived on Earth, patiently waiting for humans to eventually inhabit the planet to fulfill its only purpose, to kill and devour. It came to what would eventually become Derry, Maine, and developed a schedule consisting of intense hibernation periods, sleeping for around 27 years at a time before it wakes up to hunt and feed on humans for anywhere between 1 and 3 years, before it goes back to sleep and repeats the cycle. It prefers to eat children, as children's fears are naturally easier to represent physically, meaning that it can more easily use that to its advantage, as victims' fears are what give Pennywise its power over them. So, to lure children in, it took the form of a circus performer known as Pennywise the Dancing Clown, inflicting fear and terror on its victims for centuries to come. But as many of you probably already know, the clown look is far from the only form that Pennywise can take, and this is thanks to its near limitless shape-shifting power. Pennywise can change its physical form to that of anything it conjures up in its deranged mind, including real and fictional beings. Not only that, it can appear in multiple places at the same time or as different forms simultaneously, and it can even appear as different things to different people, which is heavily dictated by the various observers' fears. Listing every single form that Pennywise has ever taken would be nearly impossible, but just to name a few, it's transformed into a werewolf, a mummy, a crawling eye, a doll, a school of piranhas, a monstrous dog, a head of a human, a full human, a corpse of a human, and of course a giant spider with a clown head attached to it, which is known as its ultimate physical form. However, this is only the closest thing that the human mind could process as its true form. Remember that it is a non-physical being despite being able to produce physical bodies. Because of this, while Pennywise might be able to feel pain if its physical body is attacked or injured, it's impossible for anyone to put it down for good in this manner. And even then, Pennywise has a superhuman healing factor to quickly repair damage. And by opening its freakishly big mouth in front of its victims, Pennywise can show them its true form, aka the Deadlights. These 3 bright orange lights can steal or manipulate the very soul of whomever gazes upon them, converting them to full-blown insanity or just killing them, after which Pennywise proceeds to devour them. The clown also possesses physical strength and speed levels far beyond that of any normal human. While all of that is certainly impressive, Pennywise also has many more powers and abilities at its disposal, both on the physical and mental side of the scale. In addition to its superhuman speed, Pennywise's teleportation lets it instantly travel great distances with ease, or alternatively can allow for many more options when stalking and scaring victims. That combined with its ability to appear completely invisible to whomever it wants for as long as it wants, shows that it can stay fully undetected in its attempts to hunt and kill. So even if you think you've lost it, it's still got you right where it wants you in all likelihood. Pennywise has also shown a few indicators of having control over the weather and control over various mysterious plant life, but that doesn't even scratch the surface of how powerful of a mind it has. It possesses remarkable telekinetic power, which lets it levitate multiple people at once with its mind, bend gravity, bend space-time, and it can just make inanimate objects behave unnaturally. And of course, it can levitate itself, supposedly through use of its red balloons. Pennywise's telepathy allows it to mentally communicate with anyone, as well as read their emotions and memories in order to trigger the most amount of fear as possible. And Pennywise can manifest these fears through its power of illusion generation. Pennywise can create illusions of practically whatever it wants, and while people can see through them with enough willpower, they're somehow also tangible creations, capable of interacting with and harming the victims. Pennywise can also affect the minds of many humans at the same time, though this is mostly used as a way to subtly manipulate adults into not getting involved in its plots for hunting children. Pennywise undoubtedly has a lot going for it as far as cosmic power and unpredictability go, but like in many cases, this power can lead to arrogance and underestimation, Pennywise believing it is untouchable even though it isn't. Pennywise's true form can be made vulnerable or killed if its victims overcome their fear through use of the ritual of Chewed, which is specific but exists nonetheless. However, the extraterrestrial representation of evil will always find a way to make you scream, and at that point, it's all but got you in its grasp. It may be a clown, but it'll be the only one laughing after all is said and done, all while enjoying a long-awaited feast. Alright, so now that I've gone over both of these characters, it's finally time for me to say who I think would win this battle. And I gotta say, the extent of each of their abilities and the reach of those abilities are so large and undefined, it's a real challenge to pin down any absolute limits for either of them. And this can leave the fight dynamic very up for interpretation, which certainly isn't ideal, but is to be expected. However, based on my own interpretations of this battle and what the combatants have shown, I do personally believe that Slender Man would be the winner of this fight. And if you think that Pennywise would win, that's great, that's totally fine, let me know why down in the comments below, but first here's my reasoning for why I think Slender Man would win more often than not. The comparisons between these characters on the physical level are honestly just all over the place. When it comes to speed and stealth, both have teleportation and both have options for hiding, but Slender Man has the advantage of being able to detect where his victims are at all times, completely negating Pennywise's invisibility and allowing Slender Man to stay one step ahead with his own invisibility. Plus, his numerous tendrils give him ways to attack from a distance and up close when necessary, keeping Pennywise in his reach at all times and making sure that he stays out of Pennywise's reach, at least physically speaking. Some of their various abilities surprisingly line up quite nicely, like telepathy, telekinesis, weather manipulation, and warping space and time, and of course they're both masters of intimidation and taking complete control over their encounters. Both are considerably physically strong as shown by their massacring of normal humans, and both can regenerate from pretty much any physical attack with no problem at all, which is where things start to get a little weird. The thing is, not only could Pennywise increase certain physical capabilities when shape-shifting into its other forms, and create tangible illusions, it also cannot die or even be permanently harmed by any physical mean, as its true form is not a physical being. But even then, the exact same level of survivability could be attributed to Slender Man despite his form being strictly physical, as nothing is ever shown to be able to do damage to him that he couldn't just heal from perfectly and immediately. Regardless of Pennywise's forms and illusions, nothing's going to make Slender Man more physically vulnerable, and he could probably just see through the illusions anyway. So where do we go from here? How does one kill the other? Well, at this point, we have to primarily focus on their mental powers instead of their physical ones to make a real judgment. And unfortunately for Pennywise, it doesn't stand a chance when going mind versus mind. As I previously mentioned, both of these guys have very similar psychic abilities like messing with minds, but Slender Man's pure mental power is just too much when stacking it up against Pennywise's. Neither being has definitively proven that they have any sort of full psychic resistances, but at least looking at the traits that they've shown, Pennywise's capabilities are actually very limited. Pennywise's telepathy has never shown applications too far outside of just communication and detection of memories and emotions, and when it comes to mind control, Pennywise really only seems to possess a form of misdirection, or manipulation of the senses, making select people unaware of ongoing catastrophes. But Slender Man has much more power in the realm of memory, sensory, and emotional alteration, allowing him to physically and mentally torture his victims with just his presence, and he can directly take control of their actions like making them commit suicide. And unlike Pennywise's Pennywise's illusions, Slender Man's hallucinatory attacks can't just be willed away with enough thought. Even though Slender Man could be killed at the hands of someone psychically strong enough, with such inferior capabilities, Pennywise wouldn't really have the opportunity to beat Slender Man with its mind. Now, of course, the only known way that anyone could kill Pennywise is by performing the ritual of Chewed, which when done successfully involves destroying your fear both physically and mentally, leaving Pennywise powerless. Remember, Pennywise gets its power over its victims through their fear, so when there's no fear, it has no power, and the ritual actually attacks the true form of Pennywise, the Deadlights, allowing it to be put down for good. However, Slender Man is a being that does not feel fear or has any fears needed to be overcome, meaning not only does the ritual become redundant and unnecessary, this heavily implies that Pennywise would have no power over Slender Man in the first place. By Slender Man not reacting or emoting in response to any of Pennywise's tricks or abilities, Pennywise would surely become weaker and weaker in every aspect, and eventually die for all intents and purposes, just as the losers did to it with ease. Really, the only way that Pennywise could somewhat reliably pull off a win here, assuming that this would still work even with Slender Man's fearlessness, is if it gets Slender Man to look at the Deadlights, as Pennywise can kill whomever as much as glances at them by manipulating the target's soul. But even assuming that Slender Man does indeed have a soul, and assuming that he can literally see the Deadlights despite not having eyes, trying to catch Slender Man in the Deadlights is much tougher and less practical than Slender Man mentally overpowering Pennywise from a distance, which again, he can definitely set himself up to do thanks to his tendrils, invisibility, and enemy detection. Without greater psychic attacks in general, Pennywise can't compete with Slender Man when they're both going all out, and with no fear for Pennywise to feed on, its psychic power as a whole is probably just a moot point on its own. Overall, both of these characters are frightening as hell and possess near unfathomable amounts of power, but only one of them could ever be considered a true unstoppable force. Simply put, in a battle that will inevitably become mental instead of physical, Pennywise's abilities are child's play when compared to Slender Man's level of psychic domination, and Slender Man has exactly what he needs to ensure a true victory. Pennywise may be crafty and hard to put down, but I feel that Slender Man's superior physical and mental control, combined with his various counters, would prove who really is the most super of the supernatural. So, in my opinion, the winner is the Slender Man. So guys, thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please give this video a huge like. I always appreciate the likes. You can comment your comments down in the comments below. Subscribe if you could too, that'd be amazing. If you want to see more Who'd Win and Why, you can click the box on the right. Or if you want to see more what the channel has in store, you can click the box on the left. But no matter what you guys do, thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And next time on Who'd Win and Why, we've got Freakazoid going up against The Mask. See you all then.